We're on page 324. The title is Transactions with Inadequate Consideration. What is meant by inadequate consideration? What's meant by consideration?
Something value going from one party to the other.
So value transferred from, well, between parties, and hopefully both parties got the same value. Inadequate consideration means that somebody got value that's greater or less than fair market value. The Income Tax Act is all about fair market value. The Income Tax Act wants transactions to be at fair market value. Now, the Income Tax Act and CRA can trust that people dealing at arm's length, somebody define that for me? I'm at arm's length with
A non-related party.
a non-related party, someone who's not my natural relative. I'm at arm's length with the gentleman who fixes my car. I'm not at arm's length with my wife. Good thing.
Probably.
40 years this year. 4-0.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you're still standing.
The applause for her, I promise you. So the Act says, look, if you've got transactions not at arm's length, we've got rules in place to make sure that we make the transaction at fair market value. And then the Act says we're going to deem that related persons, defined term, related persons are deemed not to deal at arm's length. Please turn to section 251. So related persons are deemed not to be at arm's length. So if you're keeping score, we've had associated, connected, and now related. Associated and connected are about corporations only. One corporation is associated with another corporation. One corporation is connected to another corporation. So they're only about corporations. But related means related with any taxpayer. So for example, I am, as I said earlier, related to my wife. I'm related to my corporation if I have majority control of it. I'm related to my corporation. She's related to her corporation. I'm also related to her corporation. My corporation is related to her corporation. So this whole thing is related. Note I said related, not associated. You'll recall that section 256, which deals with associated, has a different thing. It's about control. This is about being related, which is something that's sort of broader than control. I can be related to her corporation, and my corporation's related to her corporation, but they're not associated. Yes?
Does this mean that in a situation where, like in other sections of the Act, where you can use things like fair market value, contracts, like lawyers as intermediaries to ensure that even though spouses are, can still operate at an arm's length? Does this mean that anything that references related? Because like I'm reading here, like 251(2)(a) just says anybody that is connected by a blood relationship. So that means that at no time would I and my sister ever be able to do anything and have it deemed to be non-arm's length because that's it. Even if we're estranged, even if we're dealing through intermediaries, even if we're dealing with anything.
I'm going to repeat the question. If I'm in a blood relationship with somebody, is it the blood relationship that makes us related? Is it possible not to be related, for example, if we're estranged? No. This is by genetics, not psychology.
Okay.
And by the way, the definition of blood relation, believe it or not, that's even defined in the Income Tax Act. Please go to 251(6). Income Tax Act defines just about everything. One is the child or other descendant, or brother or sister, so we call that lineal descendant. And by the way, that also connects us with parents and grandparents, and brother or sister. Marriage, oh, there's one that's somewhat related to psychology, or at least a non-genetic relationship. And if I'm no longer married, I'm no longer related to my spouse, et cetera, et cetera. The ones that we are concerned with in this class, in this course, are 6A and B. Interestingly, I'm not related to my uncle. This is the importance of knowing the fact that the Income Tax Act has its own definition. Without this, I might think I'm related to my uncle, but I'm not. Nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts, no, because they're not A or B, believe it or not, true story. Back to 251(1).
Dan, so you used to get married for tax benefits for like income splitting. Now could it be the case that you get divorced for benefits of being not related as a spouse anymore?
This is about transferring property from one person to another. You can have sort of tax benefits accruing for former spouses, for example, in the payment of support payments and alimony. One pays tax, one gets a deduction or not, depending on how they arrange it. But this is only about the transfer of property from one person to another. I hope that answers your question.
So there's no tax implications for the transfer of property from one to another, then you're saying?
From a spouse to another spouse?
Yeah, like I'm wondering if there's tax implications for being found to be related, or there's certain things you are or aren't allowed to do, and you want to then do them. Could we just, well, let's just get a divorce, and then we won't be related, and we can manipulate however we want. Maybe there's no benefits from doing that, though, and being unrelated.
That might be theoretically possible, I don't know.
Okay.
So related persons, for the purpose of this act, and that means that all parts of the act, not just part 1, but part 4 and any other part, related persons are deemed not to deal at arm's length. And by the way, it's possible, even for people who are not related, as defined in 251(6), not to be dealing at arm's length. So for example, if you're doing an arm's length transaction for somebody and you're both trying to accomplish something for the benefit of one or the other, for the tax benefit of one or the other, it's possible that you'll be considered not to be dealing at arm's length. So says 251(1)(c). But really where we are for this course is 251(1)(a). Related persons are deemed not to deal with each other at arm's length. Sub 2 says these people are related, these persons are related. Individuals connected by blood relationship, marriage, or common law partnership or adoption, and you've seen the definition of blood relationship in sub 6. A person who controls a corporation, if it's controlled by one person, or a person who's a member of a related group that controls the corporation, or any person related to a person described in 1 or 2, like the panoply, I think that's the right word, of relationships is huge. Much broader than, for example, being connected or being associated. the good news, and now I'm getting to the punchline, is that this related thing is only for transfers of property from one person to another. For example, between me and my corporation, this has to be at fair market value. Between my wife and her corporation, or between me and her corporation, all these transactions have to be at fair market value. Any two corporations, if they're controlled by the same person or any group of persons, if one of the corporations is controlled by one of the person and the person who controls the other corporation is related to the person who controls the other corporation, that's this, related also. Any questions on what related is? Now please go to section 69 of the Act. Bracket 1. And where this is going is, I run a business. I, as a proprietor, have a business. And I would like, I've been running it for 5 years, let's say. And now I would like my corporation to run that business. In order to do that, the corporation has to own the business. In order for the corporation to own the business, I have to sell the business to my corporation. I am related to my corporation. So said, whatever, 251, 2B or C. I'm related to my corporation. 251 says, since I'm related, I'm deemed not to deal at arm's length with my corporation. Section 69 says, where a taxpayer, my corporation, has acquired anything from a person with whom the taxpayer was not dealing at arm's length, me, at an amount in excess of the fair market value thereof at the time the taxpayer so acquired it, the taxpayer shall be deemed to have acquired it at fair market value. So the Income Tax Act is saying, look, we'll set aside the price. The contracted price doesn't count for tax purposes. The fair market value is different. We're going to say the transaction happened at fair market value. There are a number of possible scenarios. These are the scenarios. Let's say we're transferring something for, it is worth $2,000, but we're messing with the sale price. We're giving it away for free, or we're charging more or something. If the sale price is in fact $2,000, the proceeds is deemed by Section 69 to be $2,000, which sort of makes sense because that's fair market value. The adjusted cost base for the purchaser going forward is $2,000, which makes total sense. Talk about double taxation in a second. There's no double taxation here. We simply sold something to somebody for $2,000 fair market value. I might have a capital gain if I sold it, fine. The person gets it at $2,000, that's their adjusted cost base going forward. Awesome. Instead, I gift it to them. Section 69 says, buddy, your deemed proceeds is still $2,000. We're still going to call it a fair market value transaction. So whatever capital gain or whatever you've got is based on proceeds of $2,000, not based on the contractual proceeds, which is zero. Section 69 also says, we'll go back into the Act right away, that the adjusted cost base for the purchaser is $2,000, which honestly is pretty generous. It's saying to the purchaser, look, we'll give you $2,000 adjusted cost base, even though you paid zero. Because it can get worse than that. Some people say, well, okay, we'll avoid, let's avoid Section 69. Let's not make it a gift like $0. Let's make it $1. We'll sell it for $1. Deemed proceeds are still $2,000. And the adjusted cost base is not $2,000, as was the case if I gifted it. It is instead $1. So I, the transferor, I paid tax on the capital gain, whatever my adjusted cost base is, I don't know, but my proceeds is deemed to be $2,000. And the poor person who sold it, to whom I sold it for $1, their adjusted cost base is only $1. They didn't get cranked up to $2,000 like the gifted person. Therefore, when the second person sells it someday, there will be double taxation on $1,999 of value. If you're a lawyer and somebody says, I think there will be a tax if I gift this, why don't we just sell it for $1? That's the wrong answer. It's better to have the gift, in which case the same amount of tax is payable by the giftor, but at least the person who gets the gift gets to say that their adjusted cost base going forward is today's fair market value, rather than $1 if that's what their plan is. If the sale price is higher than fair market value, well, I'm buying this from my kid, I'll give the kid more than fair market value. The sale price is $3,000, which is the actual sale price. There's nothing in Section 69 that overcomes that. The purchaser paid $3,000 for it. The purchaser doesn't get a $3,000 adjusted cost base. They only get fair market value, which is $2,000. Again, double taxation, in this case, on $1,000 of value. It is devoutly wished that you would have all your transactions be either at fair market value, second choice gift, but I think you'd rather have them all at fair market value. And never to have proceeds higher than fair market value or proceeds different from zero. Yes?
And that only refers to non-arm's length parties, right?
This is only for non-arm's length parties. Bless you. One type of which is related person, so says Section 251. If you've got good facts saying that you're dealing at arm's length with a non-related person, make the proceeds whatever you think they should be, whatever you negotiate, hard negotiate with that person. But if you're in a situation where it could be construed that you are dealing not at arm's length, even with a non-related person, or if you're in a transaction with a related person, the potential for double taxation is significant. Section 69 can hurt us badly. Now we'll just go through 69 briefly. So this is, A is the first one. A is the $3,000 case. The taxpayer shall be deemed to have acquired it at fair market value. That is at $2,000. And there's nothing that overcomes the actual proceeds of $3,000. So the transferor pays tax on the capital gain based on the actual proceeds of $3,000. Zero proceeds or proceeds less than fair market value, the taxpayer shall be deemed to have received proceeds equal to fair market value. So that's the case of either a gift or $1. The taxpayer who made the gift still has to pay tax based on $2,000 proceeds. And finally, where the taxpayer acquires property by way of gift, C, the taxpayer is deemed to acquire the property at fair market value. That's the zero proceeds one. The good news is that the acquirer gets fair market value proceeds. If you still have Section 69 open to gaze at A, B, and C, I'll put this back up, and now you can see how this actually plays out. And please go to this link after class to have a look at it. And have 69, 1A, B, and C open. Back to my situation. I want to transfer my business to a corporation. My business is worth more than when I started it. It's looking like I'm going to have a capital gain. keeping the math simple just for this first exercise, let's say that it's actually not a business, but it's a piece of land. So I'll move this land from here to here, and that's going to give rise to a capital gain. Because my land has adjusted cost base of, say, $100,000, but fair market value today of $500,000. Income Tax Act says, you are related to your corporation. This transaction has to be at $500,000. And for which I want to take back $500,000 worth of consideration anyway. I mean, why wouldn't I? I'm selling to another person, even though I own the corporation. I'd still like to get $500,000 worth of consideration. The Income Tax Act gives us an opportunity to do this transaction on a tax-free basis. This is one of the most important things for corporate and commercial lawyers, never mind tax lawyers, even corporate and commercial lawyers, to use this get-out-of-jail-free card that allows us to make this transaction on a tax-free basis. Please turn in the Income Tax Act to Section 85. Bracket 1. The punchline here is that I would love to transfer this at only $100,000 proceeds. That's what Section 85 allows us to do. It says, look, let's say you take back $500,000 worth of shares for this land. Fair market value, will allow you to have proceeds of only $100,000. On your personal tax return, Dan, your adjusted cost base is $100,000. You have no gain or loss. Very important tool, Section 85. The corporation has bought the property, issued consideration of shares worth $500,000. The land is now down here. The corporation inherits the land, my word, inherits, with an adjusted cost base equal to my deemed proceeds, my new proceeds of $100,000. Someday the corporation might sell the land for $2 million. It will have a capital gain based on $2 million of proceeds sold to, say, some arm's length party, let's keep it simple, minus the corporation's adjusted cost base of $100,000. Which is as it should be. I mean, I, in the first place, only paid $100,000 for it. On an actual sale outside this corporate realm, somebody should pay tax on a capital gain of 1.9. The corporation pays that tax. Pays tax on a capital gain of 1.9. Any questions so far? So it's important to have fair market value consideration. I provided $500,000 of worth of land. The corporation provided me with $500,000 worth of shares. And the corporation gets the land at $100,000 cost base going forward, and I'm allowed to report proceeds of only $100,000, thus overriding Section 69. Thus overriding Section 69. Yes?
So the corporation has to give $500,000 worth of shares to the shareholder?
Correct, has to issue $500,000 worth of shares.
The private corporation, I don't really know how this works, but how do you assign a value to the shares? That seems
it's extremely subjective. And let's get into that. One way would be, well, if this is like at the very beginning of the corporation, and maybe it's got $10 cash because I subscribe for my shares for $10, and maybe the second asset that it gets is this land, maybe those shares are worth only, that are issued to me, are worth exactly $500,000. But that's extremely difficult to prove honestly. Let's say the corporation's been operating for 2 years. Well, how much is $500,000 worth of shares? I mean, I'd almost have to get a business valuation to figure out, how many shares that is and whatever. Instead, what I can do, what the corporation can do, is issue preferred shares. Because preferred shares actually have a value on them, $500,000 worth of preferred shares. Might be 1,000 shares at 500 apiece, or 500,000 shares at $1 a piece. I don't really care. But preferred shares have a locked-in value. They don't potentially increase or in most cases don't decrease in value like common shares can. Common shares can be all over the place. So we issue preferred shares. Not only that, in order to really lock in that 500,000 value, we make the shares redeemable and retractable for $500,000. Redeemable means the corporation can call them back for exactly $500,000. Retractable means that the shareholder can put them, that is, give them back to the corporation again for $500,000. Redeemable and retractable. Redeemable means the corporation can call them. Retractable means the shareholder can put them, that is to say, take the shares back, give me my money. And in the share terms, probably in the Articles of Incorporation or Amendment, it would say that these shares are redeemable and retractable for $500,000, or whatever amount for which they are issued. Belts and suspenders would say, just to make sure that that $500,000 value is real, let's also make them, since they're preferred shares, and thus can have a different dividend than common shares, let's pay a dividend on those shares of some amount, say prime interest rate plus 2% or something like that. Now we've got 3 reasons why those shares are worth exactly $500,000. Again, the objective here is to thwart Section 69. Those shares are worth exactly $500,000 because they are redeemable and retractable and pay a reasonable dividend based on their $500,000 value. So excellent question, thank you. Yes?
So the retractability sounds like a buyback.
That's right.
But
Retractable is buyback under the control of the shareholder.
right.
Redeemable is buyback under the control of the corporation.
So you don't really want to do that, you just want that for some evidence?
You just want the evidence. You just want to be able to show CRA, oh yeah, those shares are worth $500,000 and no cents. The only thing better than taking back shares, and by the way, let's just go to Section 85 for a second. Where a taxpayer has in a taxation year disposed of any of the taxpayer's property, land, that was eligible property. Some property is non-eligible. I'll tell you an obscure one that you don't need to know for this course. Real estate that is inventory. You can really assume for the sake of this course that you can transfer anything to a corporation and have Section 85 apply. To a taxable Canadian corporation, that's one that's not a nonprofit, for consideration that includes shares of the capital stock of the corporation. Got to have at least one share. Need not necessarily be 500,000 shares or $500,000 worth. but at least one share. The following rules apply. Before we get to the rules, I would love if I could to take back not just shares, but maybe cash. Like, that would be awesome. Because you know how hard it is to pull cash out of a corporation. Like, if I've got PUC, I can take cash out tax-free. Or if I've got CDA or something, I can take out cash tax-free. Aside from that, I'm paying tax on everything else. A salary, a bonus, a redemption, blah, blah, blah. What if I could take out some cash on this deal, knowing that I only have to take out one share? I don't have to, the whole $500,000 doesn't have to be by shares. I can take out $100,000 cash out of the corporation. An amount equal to whatever my adjusted cost base of whatever it is that I'm selling to the corporation, I can take out in cash. And if the company doesn't have cash, the company can say, I owe you the money, and give me a promissory note, as it might have to do. This is on like day 2, for example, of the corporation in my example. This is awesome. I can take back so-called non-share consideration up to my adjusted cost base tax-free. Non-share consideration, there's a common law word for that, which is boot, B-O-O-T. I've taken out some shares and cash to boot. That's just an expression that's often used in court cases. So I can take out non-share consideration up to $100,000, and then I take share consideration for $400. Preferred shares, redeemable, retractable, pay a reasonable market dividend. If I took back all shares, my adjusted cost base of those shares would be $100,000. So like the $100,000 adjusted cost base that I had in the land, I now have in the shares that replace the land. Substituted property, it's called. These new shares are substitute for the land that I transferred in. $100,000 adjusted cost base, that makes sense. If I instead took out $100,000 cash, I'm not really entitled anymore to $100,000 of adjusted cost base. The adjusted cost base now of my $400,000 worth of shares is 0. And that's as it should be. Because I've hoiked out $100,000 tax-free. Therefore, used my adjusted cost base to get shares, to get cash. And some shares on the side, for which now the adjusted cost base is 0. About which I shouldn't complain, because I took $100,000 out tax-free. And again, you know how hard that is. Any questions on that? Or any combination. Took out 25 cash, took out 475 shares. Woe unto me if I take out $125,000. Deemed proceeds.
Proceeds.
Yeah. Deemed proceeds. Any question on that? Please go to page 465. And this will wrap it up for today. My example is land, which is the simplest example. Let's say instead we have a building. So a building is different from land in that it has an undepreciated capital cost, i.e. we paid something for the building and then we claim some capital cost allowance against the building, so our undepreciated capital cost is less than the original cost because we've claimed some capital cost allowance. Building cost 100, has a UCC of 90,000, has a fair market value of 130. Transfers the property to a corporation, wishes to avoid tax on the transfer. Awesome. The legal selling price, Section 69 imposes on us that has to be $130,000. And we need to take back $130,000 worth of consideration. We decide to take back $90,000 worth of boot equal to our UCC of $90,000. So in the case of a depreciable asset such as a building, we don't want to take out the adjusted cost base. We want to take out the lower amount, that is the undepreciated capital cost. In boot, we can take that amount and say now that our deemed proceeds is $90,000. Thus, no capital gain. Well, there wouldn't be a capital gain because we're less than the original cost of 100, and there's also no recapture. If we had taken out $91,000 worth of debt owing to shareholder, boot, or cash, we would have recapture of $1,000. We don't want that. This is the perfect situation. We've taken out debt up to our UCC, the lower of UCC and adjusted cost base, and we call this our tax value. We take out debt up to our tax value, which in this case is $90,000, in this case $100,000, and the rest by preferred shares, giving us total consideration of $130,000. That's beautiful, that's art, that's the way we want to do it. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.